Welcome back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is a commercial real estate broker, president of the Table Initiative, husband and father. Today's guest is Caleb David. Caleb, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. So Caleb, we're going to just jump right into things. And I'm going to change it up a little bit today because I really want to get into your story and some of the things that you're passionate about. So usually I ask 4 questions as a part of kind of the warm-up, but I'm just going to narrow that down to 2. So the first question that I have for you is there a favorite book that you have or a book that you like to gift often?
So, that's a very difficult question because I have so many books that I would love to give to everybody. But I would say my go-to book to give to people right now is Bread and Wine by Shauna Niequist.
Cool. Okay.
Incredible book.
Now, what's kind of just quickly, what is kind of the gist or what's so powerful to you personally about that book?
It really spoke to the core of who I am, and I think the core of who people truly are.
Cool.
And it is setting a table for people to get together, have conversations. And I love food. And so there's a lot of recipes in the book as well, but really it speaks to how to create space for other people.
Beautiful.
And that's what I'm all about. And so I think this gives practical tips to people, and just an easy read, just phenomenal. So I highly recommend that.
Cool, awesome. So the next and the final question in regards to the warm-up, do you have a favorite quote or mantra?
I've got lots of them, but I would say right now, the one that I'm really kind of sitting with is Maya Angelou's, once you know better, you do better.
Okay, cool, powerful, love that. All right, so we're going to just take a deep dive right now, Caleb, kind of just into your backstory and then kind of work our way up to where you're at today and everything that you're involved with. So if you don't mind sharing with myself and the listeners, where did you grow up? Kind of what did the earlier years for you, Caleb, look like?
The earlier years were fairly chaotic.
Okay.
I was born on the East Coast in New Hampshire, but my dad he's Indian, and my mom's from the East Coast, but we lived all over the place. So a lot of my childhood was spent actually growing up in India, going to school there, and then in 1991, when the Gulf War broke out, there were some things that happened there that we ended up moving back to the States. But by the time I was 11, I lived in 31 different places.
Wow.
And so definitely had the travel thing down, and the transition thing. But, as a kid, that's also very difficult.
Right.
And so we ended up moving to Oklahoma when I was 11. And that was kind of where I grew up, so to speak.
Okay.
And then moved here to Colorado 7 years ago because we wanted to live in this incredible place.
Right. Now, just in regards to your personal kind of like upbringing and just those younger years with all the traveling and exposure to different cultures and different people, what did that do for you as a young child? Was that really difficult, or did you kind of just learn to adapt to it, and did you enjoy it? What did that kind of look like for you when you were younger, being in all those different environments?
Yeah, I think when you're a kid, you don't know any different.
Right, for sure.
You're kind of just in that space, and you don't know what normal is. That was our normal.
Absolutely.
I would say the moving of schools and the changing around of houses and not having that stability was pretty difficult and somewhat traumatic, I think. But at the same time, I think it makes people resilient.
Right.
And it did make me, like you said, adaptable. And I think that served me well.
Absolutely.
In my life.
Cool. Now, I want to ask this because, we met prior to, this podcast conversation. We had a good conversation at that point. And, faith is something that's important to you. Faith is something that's important to me. So in those younger years, where did kind of like the Christian faith play in, or did it not come into kind of the scene of your life until later on?
It was always a part of my life.
Okay.
My grandfather is a first-generation Christian in India,
cool.
And so my mom's side of the family, they love God, but they were from a little bit different of a tradition than what my dad's side was from. So I would say it was always there.
Okay.
But I would say it really wasn't until my teenage years where it started becoming a little bit more mine, and then until I get into adulthood, I would say within the last 2 to 3 years is that my journey of faith has changed somewhat significantly.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to kind of move on then. So, just a little bit of the younger years, but then did you go to college? If you did, where did you go? Kind of and I think I saw on your Facebook something about maybe going to like a Bible college or doing some sort of training like that. So kind of what did those post-high school years look like for you, Caleb?
Yeah, so I ended up graduating when I was about 16 years old and had had worked since I was about 15 years old.
Okay.
And so definitely had a strong drive and work ethic. Thought I wanted to be a youth pastor. Went to Bible school in Dallas and did about a year there, and then ended up coming back and just didn't feel like it was quite was right for me. And so I ended up getting a job. And then shortly after that, I met my now wife. We've now been married 20 years as of 2 weeks ago.
Awesome.
And so then I ended up getting a job in publishing.
Okay.
And at the age of 19, ended up managing 3 different publishing companies, customer service departments. And so the goal was to go to college. And I look back now and sometimes I wish I had, but then I look back and I'm like, I don't have student debt. And my path ended up taking me a completely different direction, and I'm grateful for it.
Cool. So you started working for the publishing companies and things like that. So let's just talk about and you said so you met your wife when you were pretty young then, right?
Yes.
And then you guys got married. I'm assuming pretty short after that, or pretty young. Okay. So kind of getting married and things like that. Was there? For me, like I'm not married, but there's a lot from what I hear and observe from people. There's just a lot of growing up that happens once you enter into that commitment of marriage. There's a lot of maturing. There's a lot of kind of learning about yourself as an individual and service. So were there some difficult times for you and your wife kind of in those earlier years, maybe because you were both young and immature, or were things pretty easy right off the get-go?
No, I would say definitely there was the hard times. I would say about 3 years in was pretty difficult because I was 19 years old when I got married.
For sure.
My wife was 24 at the time, but we both had matured quite a bit, and I think we were more mature for our age than most people. We'd been on our own. We'd been supporting ourselves for a little bit of time.
Right.
I was a homeowner at the age of 19, and so there were a lot of those responsibilities that came up, and not really having a true full childhood. I think that definitely matured me a lot, but I think even with that, it's very difficult. Who you are at 19 and who you are at 24, 25 is very different.
Absolutely.
Who you're at 25 and 30 is very different. And, as I hit 40 this year, I look back even 5 years and realize how much change there is. So I think it's a lot about navigating change and really developing a relationship based on friendship more than anything else. Even when you have differences of opinion.
Right. So, like, in our culture, it seems like here in the United States of America, marriage is something that's kind of just been put to the wayside, you know what I mean? And it doesn't seem like it has the weight that it used to. But just for you personally, as a grown adult, as a man of faith, as a husband, as a dad, what is the value? What is the importance to you personally in regards to that commitment we call marriage?
I think it really is about stability, and I think that stability bleeds out from the home into community, into your workplaces. And I think that even in workplaces nowadays, you see people jumping from job to job. And part of it may be that people don't know what they want to do, what their passion is, etc. But I think really it's about stability.
Cool. So earlier, when you mentioned setting the table and just kind of talking about like that, the human connection and things like that, I want to talk about, and then just kind of moving out from marriage, because obviously that's an intimate human connection. But just as you've lived your life, Caleb, and had all kinds of experiences, which we're going to get further into that here in a minute. But what is the importance of us kind of like opening ourselves up to other human beings and having that human connection and having people and the right people surrounding us?
I think it's a lost art in our Western culture. I think when you travel, and it's one of the things that I'm passionate about, is getting people out of their comfort zones and getting people into other cultures that we may fear or not know anything about. But I think we look at the state of our country right now, the politics, the religion, and all these different things. It's very polarizing, and I think we forget the human connection. It's easy for us to hide behind Facebook posts or Twitter feeds, and we forget that there is a human being on the other side. And I think we've forgotten, or maybe never learned how to listen. And I think that's an art that we've got to reclaim, is the art of listening. Because I think without listening, you don't have understanding. Without understanding, you can't have empathy. Without empathy, you can't have compassion. And I think there's no justice in the world until we become compassionate human beings. And the only way we do that is by creating space for people to hear their stories. And so why I'm grateful for podcasts like yours. It gives people that space to have differences of opinion.
For sure.
But still be able to say, you're still welcome at the table. Still create the atmosphere of belonging. And I think we've really lost that in this day and age.
Right. And something that I just want to kind of get your opinion about is, I listened to a lot of podcasts and a lot of quote unquote successful people in regards to the worldly terms that, the money and recognition and stuff like that. A lot of those type of people say, if somebody isn't maybe serving you in the right way or isn't adding value to your life or kind of in alignment with you, you should cut that person or those people out. You should really surround yourself just with like-minded people and things like that. What's your personal opinion on that?
Well, I would say overall, I would disagree. I think you need to have like-minded people around you, absolutely. Sure. But I think if it becomes an echo chamber of people just saying what you want to hear,
right,
and have your own beliefs continually reconfirmed to make yourself feel better, I feel like that's a very dangerous and somewhat narcissistic standpoint.
Right. Yeah.
I think you have to have other voices in your life. And I think it's dangerous not to. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And just from like a biblical perspective, when I hear people talking about that, like I understand where they're coming from and I understand it. But it's just hard for me from a biblical perspective to accept that, because we see Jesus coming. He came to seek and to save that which was lost. He reached out to the lepers and things like that. So there's always that struggle, but I think I really love that, what you said in regards to just having, different voices in your life, having some people that are willing to speak into your life, maybe some of those hard things, and maybe hold us accountable and challenge us, right?
Absolutely. I think, the current evangelical church has turned into more of a nationalist political movement than it has. I think we forget the red letters. We forget what Jesus really taught. And I think we've lost our compassion because of that. And we want our rights more than we want compassion for other people.
Right.
And one of the things that you mentioned earlier is really just talking about, people of different values, just keeping people of the same values around you. I think the first thing is to define what are your core values. And every decision has to be made out of those core values. And so, one of mine is courage, freedom. I've established 5 of my personal core values. And part of that is, one of those is beauty. And so there's beauty when you set a table for somebody. There's not beauty when you build a wall between people, and so that's how I choose who I surround myself with. I'm open to anybody, but there are people who are my core people that I keep around me that hold me accountable.
Absolutely.
But that also doesn't mean that I shut out anybody else.
Cool. Okay, so you mentioned beauty as one of your core values, and something that I was just doing a little bit of research on you and looking at some of your social media things before our conversation today. And one of the things that you posted, I think it was actually just yesterday, maybe the day before, earlier this week for sure, was you said something about having I don't want to say hard, but just some really open and truthful conversations with your kids. Yeah. And one of the things that you said you discussed with your kids that evening was true beauty. So beauty being a part of your core values, and then you having this recent post explaining or sharing what true beauty is to your kids. What is all of this beauty? What is that to you personally, and how does that word kind of resonate within your soul and within your heart?
Yeah, I mean, every situation is totally different, but with my kids, specifically with the post you're talking about this week, talking to my daughter who's now in middle school, both my kids, both my daughter and my son, were adopted from Ethiopia, and it's just been very close to our heart. But one thing that we've been very intentional about is that we have open conversations with our kids. Both of our kids know that they have birth mothers that are still alive that had to give them up because of poverty. And it's one of the reasons why we started the Table Initiative, is because we don't think that any mother should be separated from their child because of poverty. And so, I think we have to lean into our own poverty to find beauty. And I think we don't really find beauty at the surface level. You've got to dig in. And so, for example, my daughter being in middle school, now she's facing situations and conversations she's never had before. She's in a primarily white school. There is some diversity, but she sometimes feels like, hey, I wish my hair wasn't this curly.
Right,
I wish my skin was a little bit lighter. I wish I had blonde hair. And I think that's a lot of what the media tells us that beauty is. And we had to go deeper with her and say, listen, how many people have traveled the world like you? She's 12 years old and on her third passport. So we're trying to instill, the love of travel and other people within her. And so we try to bring in the richness of what she has and turn that into her beauty. And she's a beautiful girl, and everybody wants her hair. Everybody wants her skin color, but she doesn't see that. And so we had to go deeper and just say, when people start asking her about, well, you have two moms, well, how do we deal with that? I mean, that's a hard thing for a 12-year-old or any age person to have a conversation about. So we're trying to give her as much narrative and language that's helpful to her, but also building up as much as we can her self-esteem and her knowing, here's where your beauty lies. It's not on the surface. She's gone back and served with me in Ethiopia, 3 times at 12 years old. She got to go and experience 2 weeks of vacation in Italy.
Absolutely.
And experience that culture. So we've really had to speak to that and really the core of who she is. And yes, these experiences feed into that, but it's really not the experiences themselves. It is what that has built up within her that she doesn't see yet. And we've got to find a way to mirror that and show her where that is.
So really, from what I'm hearing from you, Caleb, it's kind of really trying to encourage the inner beauty as opposed to that worldly or outward beauty. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely. And I think that bleeds into outer beauty.
Absolutely.
And I think what our goal for our kids is for them to be kind human beings. I don't think there's anything more beautiful and humble than kindness.
For sure.
And so for us, that's what we want them to live out is kindness.
Cool. Now, I want to just hang out here for a little bit longer because you mentioned having these open conversations with your kids. What for you and your wife, what is the importance of having these open conversations? Because for me personally, a lot of things that I learned when I was in middle school came through school, came through not necessarily the teachers, but through my peers, through friends. And for a lot of things, when you're at that age, you don't necessarily want to learn them from your friends.
Sure.
So what is just that importance to you and your wife and your family to really address some of these conversations and have these open conversations before they hear it from a teacher, before they hear it from a friend, before they hear it from social media?
Yeah. So, I was raised pretty sheltered. And so just like you said, I heard about things from other people and didn't really have a place to go just because we had some family circumstances that were pretty rough growing up. Have a good relationship with my family now, but you have to work through a lot of stuff. Absolutely. And I never had that space to really just say, hey, what does this mean? Or what is this about? Why did this person say that? And so we want it as uncomfortable as it is. And sometimes we don't have the words for or the true wisdom to address. We just want to be a safe place for our kids. So even letting them know that, hey, we don't know what we think about this, or we don't, we want to create the space for conversation to where we can wrestle with it together. And I think that's a skill that we've had to learn as adults that I hope that my kids can learn now.
Powerful, man. No, that's good. I could spend because I'm a school teacher and I'm working with kids all the time and worked with youth for a long time, and that's something that I've had to really step into just recently. You always hear when it comes to human connection and especially intimate relationships is communication. We hear that and we say that, but to actually live that out and to really step into that, sometimes that uncomfortable communication with a loved one, with a family member, with whoever, whatever, it's hard. And it's kind of like when the rubber meets the road. It's we all know about communication, but are we actually stepping into that and doing that? So I just want to just acknowledge you and your wife, even though I don't know your wife, but just acknowledge you and your family and your wife for stepping into that, just having those open conversations with your kids, because as a public educator, and we see this a lot too with religion and Christianity. It's people want to bring their kids to school. People want to bring their kids to church and expect us educators, pastors, things like that to kind of teach their kids what they're supposed to learn. Yeah. From my perspective, even though I don't have my own kids personally, true education happens at home. True preparation for the real world happens at home. And then us public educators, people that are in education, the pastors, we're just there to kind of build upon that. So I just want to acknowledge
thank you.
what you guys are doing.
And I don't think we do it particularly well, but I think it's something we're stumbling through and attempting to do the best that we can. And I think at the end of the day, that's what I've had to resolve myself is that I'm not going to raise perfect children.
Yeah,
I'm going to make mistakes, and they're going to need therapy, just like I needed therapy for something. But to be able to give them the tools to kind of wrestle with harder things, hopefully that gets them a little bit farther along than I was.
For sure, yeah.
And I think we've got to model as best as we can, as imperfect as we are. Let's model the best way, and I think that's the role of teachers and the role of church. But it is really about the whole picture, not just about. Because you're right. I mean, I hear people all the time. Just let me drop them off to the teachers and have them fix them.
Right. Yeah. So cool, man. It's great. That in itself is beautiful to me personally. What you guys are attempting to do and you are doing with your own kids. So all right. So I want to because I know that you have a passion about adoption. You have some different experiences. So. I just want to kind of really open up our conversation right now, Caleb, in regards to adoption, kind of like just maybe your personal experience adopting your kids, and then maybe some of the things that you've learned over the years, maybe some of your perspectives and opinions that you have now in regards to adoption, especially people that are coming from our country in the U.S. And I just kind of want to give you the floor to kind of share your heart and your spirit in that.
Yeah. The adoption process has been such a journey, and even my beliefs and opinions of that have changed pretty significantly. That's always been my heart and passion is to, when my wife and I, before we got married, we talked about how do we want to grow our family, and it was always adoption. We had traveled enough around the world to see that there was a lot of need. But, over time, our process and how we engage adoptions definitely changed. And part of that was through our own personal adoption journey, and then, like I mentioned before, both my children have birth mothers that had to give them up because of poverty. And, I think in a perfect world that wasn't broken and fallen, they would have had their family unit kept together. But we do live in this broken world. And so we have been incredibly blessed to having two children that have just impacted our lives. And people always talk to us, you're doing such a great thing by adopting. And, adoption got put on such a high pedestal. And the narrative, when we had entered into the adoption world, the narrative was that, there's 147 million orphans in the world. If this many people within every church in America would adopt, then we would eradicate the orphan crisis. And as I look back, and that was a narrative that I bought into, and it was part of my journey, and it's been part of other people's journey. Some people have gotten stuck. Going back to the Maya Angelou quote, is that once you know better, you do better. And so as we went through both of our adoption processes, we had, through the Table Initiative, had started doing work in Ethiopia within the communities and started realizing that it was a very, very broken system, and the conversations that were happening here through the evangelical church were actually pretty incorrect. They weren't, I don't think they were coming from a wrong heart or a wrong motivation, but it definitely very quickly turned, at least from what we've seen firsthand in Ethiopia, adoption became very much an industry. And we started speaking out because we started seeing children being trafficked from their families. Women and men that had children that were in such poverty that maybe didn't have the reading skills or the education skills and privileges that we've had here, were essentially being told, hey, these kids are going to we're going to take them to America, they're going to get an education, then they're going to start supporting you. But what was not communicated, and this was what the justice side of us really rose up, because we started realizing it was primarily Christians that were doing this, because they thought these kids had a better opportunity in the States, and they would get to know Jesus there. And I just kept thinking, well, so Jesus doesn't reside in Africa? Right. And so we started questioning the whole process. And we literally knew and used to partner with a church that had an orphanage that was literally an adoption agencies that have since been exposed on 2020 and different things like that. Seeing these kids literally being bought and then sold for adoption. And these families not knowing, and these kids not truly knowing what they were in for. They didn't know that all parental rights had been stripped. And so we started speaking up about that, and then told a bit of our story and what we had seen in a book called The The Child Catchers that came out about 8 years ago. And it was a very controversial book, but we feel like the author, Catherine Joyce, told our story with dignity. There are some items in that book that we disagree with, but the bottom line was we got to the place where we were like, I think we should all agree that the trafficking of children for sex or for adoption, it's wrong.
Absolutely.
And families belong together as much as possible. And so as we started speaking up, we started losing donors left and right because we were now challenging the institution of the church that felt like adoption was the answer to most of the world's problems. And to think that just adoption by itself could solve a massive social issue like poverty and orphans and, it is really pretty naive to think that adoption is the answer.
Right.
It's a piece of the puzzle, and it should be the last option for a child to be taken out of its own culture. 70% of the orphans in Ethiopia, we found out, that were in orphanages actually had families. And so our concept of what an orphanage is completely different, and I think we forget here in the West, we want a quick and easy answer. We want to send money. We want to adopt a kid. Not that adopting a kid is easy, but we think that it's very transactional. And we don't jump into understanding the cultures and the communities within which these kids are, or these single moms are. And we don't understand the social constructs. And we make decisions based on our perspectives, not what truly is happening there.
Right.
We don't have the humility to stop and listen and learn to what the true needs are. And that requires commitment on our part to go deeper.
Right. Do you believe that kind of like this experience that you've seen with the American church specifically and kind of this whole adoption thing, do you believe that this really feeds into kind of the ego and just kind of that arrogance that I believe a lot of us Americans, I'm including myself in that, because I haven't traveled the world, I haven't had the experiences you've had, not even close, but do you really feel like your experience in this adoption process and kind of seeing some of the things that you've seen with the American church, it just really feeds into that ego and that arrogance of us being Americans? We've got the money, we've got the best. We're going to take these kids and we're going to do it our way because we know best and we've got the best to offer.
100%. And I think it's very, very sad. And what we call it in my line of work is it's the white savior complex, and it truly exists. And, we get flack for it all the time. But, when we take our colonialism, our version of colonialism, and go and try to impose it on somebody else without trying to understand, that's very opposite from what I see Jesus doing in the Bible. And unfortunately, that's what it's become. It's become a way that we go to essentially conquer and get people's views to turn to ours because we know best. We have a democracy. We have we have wealth, but you know what? We also have a lot of poverty.
Absolutely.
And I think what we tell our teams when we travel with the table is we tell our teams, you're going to encounter poverty, but you are going to encounter your own poverty. And our Western mindset is to say, let's fix the other person's poverty, and we completely ignore our own.
Right.
And so what we really push people to do is recognize your poverty, recognize their beauty, their richness, their dignity, and then it becomes about mutuality. It's no longer transactional of, here as Americans, we're coming in and we know better. And that is exactly where this corruption has come in. We talk about the trafficking of children. The Western church, with all of its wealth, its monetary wealth, has created a model of Christianity in Africa, in Ethiopia at least, that we have seen, that has actually corrupted the church and has turned into a money-making scheme. We want to build bigger buildings. We want to do, adopt more kids, and it really has done more damage than good. And we have seen, and it's strong language, and I've shared this before, but a lot of people cringe when I say it, is that we have to be aware that we aren't going into these communities and missionally raping them for our own glory. And so we've exploited poverty for so many years because we have to say, here's our ROI. When we come back to our churches here, we come back to our communities here, they want to see our ROI. Sometimes the ROI is that you continue to show up without any results. You show that some of that, your ROI is you're building relationships, whether or not you get the glory. And so I think that's what's very difficult for for us to understand as Americans going over. And so we try to, again, creating space for people in their journey. And then once we hear from our partners on the ground in these other countries, and they say, hey, you don't need to do that. We've had very recent situations where we've had to confront racism. We've had to confront all these different types of things, and go back to our teams and say, hey, listen, we've got to do better, and take what we have learned and internalize that.
Right.
And, yeah.
So just speaking on what you just said in regards to kind of taking what we've learned and internalizing that through this whole process, this for you and your wife, adopting your kids and going through that process, and then also working with the Table Initiative, which you're the president of, you founded that. So all of these different experiences. And I know this, again, this could be probably a 2 or 3 hour podcast in of itself, but just maybe there's 1 or 2 things just quickly, Caleb, that you have learned through this process and you have internalized for yourself personally, and it's really kind of helped you grow and mature as a man and specifically a man of faith. What would be those 1 or 2 things that you've really learned? I
would say the biggest one, without question, is it deals with identity, and I think that resounds with just about every human being. So much of what I did, I've been in the nonprofit sector for 20 years, in commercial real estate now for just over 5. But for 15 years, what I did was who I was. And thankfully, I had a mentor that cared enough about me, that saw me on the verge of burnout. When we moved here to Colorado, we were in such a bad place. I mean, we were living in a friend's basement on food stamps, and we were just tired. We were exhausted. But then it took that walking through that journey of brokenness and darkness to encounter the bottom of ourselves, and we're still working through a lot of that stuff. But I think my identity was so wrapped up, and I'll speak for myself personally, in the work that we did with the Table, the work we did in Ethiopia, the work we did, around the world, that I couldn't separate who I was from what I did. And I had to go through the separation, and that took, and I think we're starting to talk about this more and more in this day and age, but when I was growing up, you didn't talk about therapy, you didn't talk about counseling.
For sure.
But this is stuff that we had to work through because I needed help, and I still need help. And I think that's the thing that we have to consistently learn. And we look at suicide rates, even in our city, in the affluent areas. Just because it looks like we've got all this wealth and we've got everything together, we absolutely do not. So I think, us going back to the core of who I am, and I think it took getting to the age of 40 and walking through all the things that I have walked through to realize that I want to do this kind of service with the Table, the work we do in the Middle East, out of a place of wholeness, not out of a place of being empty. And so part of that involves self-care and learning identity and knowing that what we do is not who we are. And right. I think when someone says, hey, what's your name? You meet somebody. Well, what do you do? Well, really what we're trying to do is have that human connection and know who that person is. But we don't have the language in our culture. In other cultures, they know the family names, they know the backgrounds, they know all the stuff. For us, we identify so much with what we do that we forget who we are.
So, and we've kind of talked about the Table Initiative a little bit, and we've mentioned it by name, but just for our listeners that are really finding value up to this point, and kind of like your heart and your passion, what you're sharing. What is the Table Initiative, and why did you kind of found that? What is the essence of it? What do you guys do specifically?
Yeah, and in speaking to Journey, when we started it, we talked about the narrative of the adoption movement, and we really felt like we wanted to be a tool for families who wanted to adopt but couldn't afford it.
Okay.
So we originally were called One Child Campaign with the idea of just again, like that's where we were in our journey. That's what we knew. And so we wanted to come alongside families that wanted to adopt and give them ideas on how they could fundraise to accomplish these adoptions.
Okay.
We fell into we did a lot of trips in the past where we planned large trips for other organizations and groups, and had taken 10,000 people overseas, using the traditional quote missions model. And one day a friend called me, and we felt he said, do you have contacts in Ethiopia? Our contacts fell through, and so we were doing this adoption thing, this adoption awareness thing. Then we fell into creating a trip for this church in Tennessee, and then all of a sudden we were like, hey, no, this is something that we are very good at. But again, through all of that, we we transitioned to the Table Initiative about 2.5 years ago. When our journey started changing, we knew something had to change, and so we started realizing that there's not a place for people to have civil conversation about really hard social issues. And it's not talked about very well within the church. It's not very talked about very well within our communities or on social media. So we wanted to set the table for people to be able to have these conversations and trip experiences where we can encounter a Syrian refugee that's a Muslim. And we've got in our mindset what that looks like and what that is based on the media, based on all of that. So we want to take as a table, we want to take these hard social justice issues that are hot topics and humanize them from issues into true people's stories. And so we do that through our website by telling stories, through photography, through videography, and then also by traveling to some of these places. And in fact, next month I'll be headed into the West Bank to learn more about the Palestinian refugee crisis and learn what's really happening with Israel-Palestinian conflict. We hear one narrative, but there's two sides to every story.
For sure.
And so that's really what we seek to do, is create spaces for people to learn about these hard social issues and then advocate for these causes.
Beautiful. Now, you before you like take a group of people with you, do you take trips just like with your kind of like with just kind of by yourself, or maybe with a close group of friends or acquaintances, however you want to word that? Do you kind of like go ahead of time and kind of just learn yourself personally,
Yes.
the culture and the people, so then when you do bring a group, you can be sensitive to that group or culture that you're stepping into and trying to share with the group that you're bringing? Is that kind of how it works?
Yes, and I think we have to do that. I think landing blind, and Ethiopia is not an easy country to work with. It's one of the harder ones. But then you go to the Middle East, and there's not just like two sides to the story. There's like probably 37.
For sure.
And I don't have a grasp on that yet. And so I think, again, it's all in going in with the right posture and then finding the right context in country to have conversations and start learning what are the questions we need to ask. Let's not come in with solutions. Let's come in with listening ears, and let's come in with questions so that we educate ourselves better before we act. And I think, in the past, and there's even a movie called, what was it called? Machine Gun Preacher, I think is what it was called.
Yep,
and it was very glorified, and I'm like, I'm for justice, but was that the right approach to take? Is a military action, is violence the answer? And I would say right now, my belief would be that no, it's not.
Right.
We've got to get more intimately, in touch with the communities that we're serving in. So yes, I will always go ahead with either myself or with a board member, or a close group of friends that we trust, and then we go in together and figure out, is this even in some place that we should be?
Cool. So, you're in a lot of just kind of like, I would say, leadership positions, especially with being in kind of in charge, overseeing groups of people when you go on these trips. So as a leader, as you're growing as a man, as you're maturing and going through your life experiences, Caleb, what would you say? And I know it's come up. You've said it several times, and I agree 100% with just kind of coming in with listening ears. That's something I'm really trying to work on is being a better listener.
Yeah.
And this podcast platform has really challenged me in that and has really helped me, and I'm really growing in that area. But maybe just outside of kind of the listening thing, what's maybe another quality or a couple qualities that you believe are very valuable and really important for somebody who is going to be in a leadership role? That could be, business wise, that could be within the church, that could be, in the family environment. Just being a leader, what are a couple qualities outside of the listening, which I believe that may be the most important, but outside of that one, what are a couple qualities that you think are very valuable and important for a leader?
So I would say it'd have to be passion. If you don't have something that's driving the listening, you're just listening. And there's nothing wrong with just listening. Sometimes people need that. But I think passion is important. I think vision is important. And I think work ethic is really important. But you can't get so task oriented that you forget about the people around you.
Right.
And so I think that takes a level of humility as well. But I think those things you have to, in order to move forward, you have to have vision. You have to have passion.
Cool. Now, in regards to vision, how do you does the vision come from the passion, or how do you kind of create that vision or get vision in your life?
I think True vision comes from getting to know yourself and know who you are and who you were created to be. And I think a lot of times we find ourselves in the times where we don't have work or school or different things like that. What are the things that you're doing for fun? I think a lot of times your vision and passion lies within what you're doing for fun, because that you're expressing yourself in a way and in a space you get to choose what you're doing.
For sure.
So I think it's found there. And I also think a lot of times people think that, I've got to go start a nonprofit because I'm passionate about justice, or I'm passionate about homelessness, or I'm passionate about different things like that. I think we've created so many nonprofit organizations that we think that that's the logical next step. But I think, and for us, even working in other countries, we don't ever start our own thing, though it's easy to raise funds for. If you have your own thing, it's finding who is doing it well already, who's doing it with sustainability, who's doing it with accountability, and find those organizations and hook up with them and support them. And yes, some people will start a nonprofit, but I think we get so tied up in wanting to do something big that we forget about what we can do right here at home, and home or abroad. But we think that we can't start anything or we can't get involved because we've got to start our own thing.
Right.
And I think you take baby steps. I think you've got to start with, let me serve here, let me volunteer an hour here, find out what's really needed, and step into those spaces.
Cool. So I wanna kind of take a step back, because you said early on in our conversation you talked about in regards to kind of your faith. Just over, I believe you said over the last 2 or 3 years, your faith has grown even stronger. You know what I mean? And you talked about here just recently in the conversation just about kind of going through some of those difficult times. Maybe when you first moved out to Colorado, you've talked about your core values and the importance of knowing who you are and things like that. So with the core values, kind of in regards to the talk of kind of having that foundation, knowing yourself, kind of the transformation you've gone through over the last couple of years in regards to your faith, just what has your faith done for you, and how has that really helped you, Caleb, lay a foundation for you, for your wife, for your family, for the Table Initiative, and really everything that's going on in your life personally?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that my faith has changed significantly. And I think part of that is getting older. You start realizing there's more important things in life than just being right.
Right.
And then we talk about black and white all the time. There's right and wrong. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be morality. But my faith was so over-identified with the Republican Party, for example. So I've had to separate my faith from a party, whether it be Democrat or Republican.
Absolutely.
I have had to separate my faith from, an abusive childhood. I've had to separate my faith from, just seeing, what we've seen in Ethiopia with kids being trafficked. I've had to deconstruct everything and start building it back up. And I wouldn't say I've ever lost faith, but I have lost faith in the constructs that have been created within our culture around the church, the religion, and politics. So for me now, my faith informs every decision that I make through a completely different and new lens of who I believe Jesus to be. And part of that is sitting with the tax collectors, and not in an arrogant way, but in a way that is around a table that says, what can I learn from you? And, Jesus washed people's feet.
Absolutely.
That is a posture of humility. And it doesn't matter to me what walk of life or what, quote, issue or hot topic there is. I'm willing to listen to somebody. And I think one thing we've lost the ability to do, like we've talked about, is listening.
Absolutely.
And making decisions. And I think, I don't know if we can go there, but politically we make decisions based on one issue.
You can go anywhere you want.
Okay.
This is your story, and please feel free.
And it's, to me, it's not really. It is treated as political, but I think this is very truthfully, if we believe we're people of faith, then we should care about justice. And I think the topic of pro-life has become such a driving force, I think, for some parties and some individuals. And again, but I think what we forget to talk about is we say that we're pro-life, but I think what we really mean is we're pro-birth. So someone who is pro-life can also be completely okay with war You know, and I'm not to get into the weeds on it, but I think it's just to challenge our thinking a little bit on what do we really believe around the pro-life narrative. And, you know, what happens if someone in your community is pregnant? What happens if you come alongside that woman and all you care about is her giving birth? What if there's no support for her afterwards? You know, what if she's left her, you know, without a support system, and we just care about making sure that baby didn't die? And I don't want babies to die.
Right.
But we forget about the human life that is carrying the baby. And what happens if she chooses to have an abortion? Are we still pro-life? Are we still going to love her? Are we going to still come alongside of her? Are we okay with kids being separated from their parents at the border? Is that pro-life? And I think that's more than anything, and with all the things going on in our world, the gun issue, is that pro-life? And I'm not saying one way or the other right now. I just want to challenge people to think about if they say that they're pro-life.
Right.
Let's question that a little bit deeper. Let's go beyond the surface and say, and if we're just saying we're pro-birth, then say, and if that's where you stand, you know what? I disagree, but I can respect you.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? But I think we've got to start questioning, you know, that. And so my newfound faith has pushed me to start asking these kinds of questions, going back to the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
And how does that inform how we live our life? And I think we spend more time in politics and wanting power and control and money that we've disassociated, in my opinion, disassociated ourselves from why Jesus came to begin with.
So just for maybe some of the listeners out there that don't understand what the red letters are, what does that mean? And then how important have the red letters within the Bible been for you and this kind of newfound faith, or this awakening within the faith you already had? How important are the red letters to you personally? And just really focusing on them and really listening to them and allowing God to speak to you through those red letters.
Yeah, I'm currently in a season right now where, I mean, I had a hard time reading the Bible because Scripture has been used as a weapon.
Yep.
And we talk about, the armor of God, the Word of God being a sword, but I think that's been taken so literally that it has created so much damage and so much hurt within my generation and the generation after me. And we see people leaving the constructs and the four walls of the church significantly. And I don't blame them, because the Bible has been used as a weapon, not as a tool of healing. And so for me, the red letters are the tool of healing, and that is what, I mean, these are the things that Jesus has said.
Absolutely.
And there are some things even that I read yesterday, and I'm like, those two things don't line up. I'm like, what does this mean? And I grew up in the church, and I should know all the answers to this, but I do not.
Right.
And so for me, kind of what my faith has, and the red letters have led me to, is that I can either make a decision out of love, or I can make a decision out of fear. Every situation in our lives come down to that. So is this decision being made out of love, or is it being made out of fear? If I'm afraid that my job is going to be taken away from by an immigrant, then that's fear. And that does not line up for me with my faith. And so if my decision, even at my own demise, and it hurts me, if it's a decision that's made out of love, then that's the one I need to choose. So I would say that, encourage people to say, hey, listen, is this decision being made out of fear or out of love?
Right. So a word that I had written down before we stepped into this conversation was the word love. Because the word love, here in our culture, we have one word for love. We say we love ice cream, we love our spouse, all that type of stuff. But just for you personally, and the Bible, very clearly says God is love, and we have a very clear picture, biblically speaking, what love is. The Father's love for the creation through Jesus. But just for you, when you really settle on and think about the word love and really what love is, what does love look like to you, Caleb, and what does it mean to you to have love in your life and to give out love?
I think love is, first, what I'm learning is it's about receiving.
Okay.
But I would say when we talk about love, it seems like a feeling to most people, but for me, love is action. And that can be quiet action. It doesn't have to be something grand. You know, I tell people you don't have to go to the Middle East to make a difference. What about the elderly person next door that maybe just wants somebody to sit with them and talk?
Right.
Those two things are love. You know, there's no comparison between our you know, those two things. You know, so I think for me, love is action. You know, and love is speaking up. You know, and we used to say all the time, you know, I'm going to give a voice to somebody who doesn't have a voice. Well, no, they have a voice.
Right.
You know, and what our job is to do, to me, love is coming alongside them and giving, maybe amplifying their voice and giving a different platform. But I think love always indicates action.
Amen. Yeah, that's exactly how I would say it. Love is action, and for us, you know, just, you know, reading God's word, reading the Bible, that's what you get. I mean, love is action. So very well said. So I want to talk a little bit about just kind of the real estate side of things. You mentioned earlier, I think about 5 years ago, you kind of stepped into that arena. So why real estate? And specifically, I believe you're involved in commercial real estate. So why commercial real estate? And just kind of what are some of the things just through your growth process and living your life have you learned through real estate and that whole process?
Yeah. So about 6 years ago, you know, when I was in that phase of burnout, you know, a wise friend and mentor came to me and said, you know, you've been in this world of the nonprofit world for 15 years. You probably need to get out. And that was during the same time that I was working through identity issues, and so was over-identified with what I did through, you know, through our nonprofit. So, you know, I kind of fell into it.
Okay.
It wasn't like this decision where I was like, oh, I should go do this. It was more of one of those where he said, have you ever thought about getting into real estate? And, you know, I've always been interested in it, but I always thought houses, and I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't know if that's really what I want to do.
Right.
But then he brought up the idea of commercial real estate, and I had no idea, you know, what commercial real estate. I saw signs for lease, I saw buildings for sale, but I didn't know what that was. But thankfully decided to take a chance on it. And my now business partner took me on as her assistant, and she'd had about 10 years at the time of experience, and then her husband as well as a partner in the company. And so for me, it was more of a place to care for my family, and but when you're working in real estate, it's commission only, so it's a scary step.
Absolutely.
When you have a family, do I make this jump? And so it truly was an act of faith for me to say, you know what I have been doing is not working. But then I saw modeled, one of our clients has a nonprofit that does work in Mexico.
Okay.
They have a shopping center that now we filled up for them that actually funds the work that they're doing in Mexico.
Cool.
And so for me, I found it to be, oh my gosh, this could be the platform to allow me to do what I truly care about. And if that goes away, at least I'm taking care of my family.
For sure.
And it was really, when you work in the nonprofit world, it's really hard to take care of your family if it's a small nonprofit. They're not big salaries. There's, it's just a lot of hard work and burnout. And I knew that it got to the place where I knew I had to take care of my family. So this seemed to me like an option. And, I would say about a year or two into it, I finally realized, hey, this could be a career. And so I just really worked for about 3 years and didn't speak really any of my clients, anyone that I came in touch with. I didn't talk about the table.
Right.
Because I had to separate myself from that and also earn people's respect.
Absolutely.
And, at about 3 years, maybe even 4 years, I finally had the platform to be able to say to people, hey, here's something that we do. But for me now, it's using business as a way for the Tables platform, but also creating space for people in their dreams, in their jobs, that they're starting businesses, and coming alongside of people and helping them find the right space has really become a passion of mine. And treating our clients well, and just so grateful to be where I am in my career now, and to be able to use that as a platform.
Absolutely. So just within kind of the real estate world, what's maybe a thing or two that you've learned again through kind of that process, that journey of real estate that you apply to your life, or you've applied, that's really helped you to grow as an individual, as a man?
So I would say definitely hard work.
Hard work, yeah.
And then also, when you're in, especially commercial real estate, you take hits left and right. Emotionally, deals fall through. You can work 6 months on something. So I think you have to have resilience. And I think you also have to go back to values, like we talked about earlier. What are my values? Am I okay with this? Am I not okay with this? It's taught me boundaries. It's taught me how to stand up for myself. It's taught me to stand up for my clients. And also it's taught me when is the time. It's taught me humility and say, if this is what's right for my client, if this other person I'm working with has a massive ego, if I need to check my ego at the door and do what's best for my client, then that's what I should do. So I think just doing that inner work, especially, every weekend I get home and sometimes I feel like I can sleep for 12 hours straight, and sometimes I do, because it truly is a brutal place to be. But I think there's also a lot of benefit to be in that space.
Now, you just mentioned inner work, and kind of we haven't used that terminology during this conversation, I don't believe, up to this point, but we've alluded to it a lot. So maybe just outside of kind of like the spiritual, the faith practice that you have personally, Caleb, what are some other things that help you to step into that inner work and kind of refocus and kind of get energized to then step back into the real estate and everything else you have going on?
Yeah, so I would say some of the practices that I've put into place and actions that I've taken. Number one, in the last year and a half, I've adopted a meditation practice.
Perfect.
Twice a day, minimum of 15 minutes. Sometimes in the middle of the day when I'm just feeling overwhelmed, just taking a second to go and become centered and become still. And then get back to the core of who I am, because it's so easy for us to get swayed by attorneys or clients yelling at you, or a landlord saying, "How come you haven't filled my space?" So that all it's a hit on your ego, but I think we often take that, and me personally, I take that as a personal attack.
Absolutely.
And so for me, it's going back to becoming centered and then realizing this is why they're acting this way, and how do I respond now from a grounded space and a steady space. And I would say the meditation practice has been key for that. That has been important. Spiritual direction actually has been a very grounding thing. And so every other month or so, I'll go meet with a spiritual director.
Awesome.
Talk through some things. I think counseling is important, but then also having people in your life that can speak into where you're at and say, "Hey, you're overreacting right now.
For sure.
Like, let's maybe take this a step back and think." And a practice of gratefulness, and being grateful for what I have moves you back into that space of, let me operate out of wholeness, not out of my brokenness. So those are a few things. I think reading books and continue to learn is huge for me. I listen to podcasts a lot.
For sure.
But then also being aware of when I'm in the car, or I don't just have to be on the phone with somebody. Maybe sometimes I just need some silence.
Absolutely.
And knowing myself enough to know I need some solitude. So stepping away, maybe I just need to go on a hike. Maybe I need to, go to the gym more and start taking care of myself better.
Right.
And so that, to me, that's all part of the inner work. And I think all of those things truly are, if we're doing things for not just our good, but for the greater good, to me, I view that as a spiritual practice.
Cool. So I want to ask you about Colorado Springs specifically, just because that's where I live. I know this is you live in the area as well, and just from your social media, it seems like a lot of maybe your real estate and stuff is kind of in this area, and you have if you get onto your Facebook and your Instagram, you have there's a very positive vibe in regards to Colorado Springs and kind of the area. Colorado in general, what an amazing, just mind-blowing state. But I've lived here for over 2 years, and I spend a lot of time in Denver podcasting and things like that. But I really appreciate Colorado Springs. I really like the area. So just for you personally, kind of your family, Caleb, what do you guys really appreciate and like about Colorado Springs and kind of the surrounding area?
Yeah, we moved here specifically because we wanted to be around beauty, and that beauty was healing to us. So, but what we found here is just a community that I could not love more.
Right.
The wisdom that's here, the creativity that's here. I think we're at a place now as a city that we no longer feel like we have to compete with Denver. We're no longer Denver's little sister. And I love Denver.
Yeah.
But I think we've kind of found our own voice, and we're finding our own footing here. And the growth that we're seeing within the city is just tremendous.
It is. Yeah.
And it's really fun to see, and we're a large city, but it doesn't feel large.
It doesn't.
Because
Right.
you can, I feel like I can go almost anywhere in town and know somebody, because it really, if you make a little bit of effort, you are part of this community.
For sure, yeah.
And I'm not from here, but to me, this is home. And I am
Absolutely.
passionate about our city.
Yeah.
I'm passionate about large businesses and bringing jobs to our city. I'm passionate about the small businesses that are growing. I get to serve with the city and the chamber on a board that is trying to make our city the most business-friendly city in the nation. And so to be able to have a seat at that table and be able to say, from a brokerage standpoint, a real estate standpoint, here are the hurdles, and all of those things, and just to see now a lot more collaboration happening makes us, I think, the most exciting city to live in.
Yeah. So on that, because when I get on your social media, I see the passion for the city, and I love it. So let's just, because you're in real estate and you're interacting with different people and things like that, and the different committees you're on within the city. What for maybe the listener out there, what would be a couple selling points for somebody that's maybe like, they're listening to this like, man, I've heard a lot of great things about Colorado. I've heard a lot about Denver and, this place and that place, but why Colorado Springs? What are a couple of those selling points that you would just share with the listener? Say, hey, if you're going to thinking about moving out to Colorado, you're planning on moving out, you don't really maybe know where you're going to end up, this is why you should at least check out Colorado Springs.
Yeah. For me, the quality of life is incredible. The access that we have to the natural beauty and the hiking, you've got Pikes Peak, you've got Garden of the Gods, you've got, the Front Range is right here.
Absolutely.
And so to me, quality of life is why we moved here. The community is why we moved here, to be able to get connected quickly. We're also on the commercial real estate and the residential real estate side, both, we're more affordable than larger cities. And I think we've got a lot of innovation here. We've got UCCS that is just, is growing tremendously.
Absolutely.
So tech companies, we're seeing IT companies, we're seeing, we're not just about military anymore.
Right.
And that plays a huge part in who we are. But we're seeing this new development. The medical community is growing. And so I think that really feeds into a lot of why we're seeing growth and why people should come here is because we're trying to create space to build and grow and take the city to where we believe it's headed. I think it's great places.
For sure. Yeah. So we've been going just a little over an hour, so we're gonna head towards the finish line. But before we do, and we've already kind of talked, we've talked about marriage. We've talked about kind of your kids and some of the conversations that you and your wife are trying to have with your kids. But just overall and generally speaking, anytime that I have a guest on, Caleb, that is married, they have kids, I just always want to give them the opportunity and the platform to share kind of their heart in regards to what their family means to them. Because for the most part, for a lot of people, if family isn't everything, it's right beneath maybe their faith, their religion, God, things like that. So I just want to give you the opportunity. I want to give you the platform just to share from your heart, just the importance to you in regards to kind of your family and just having that close knit connection within your life in regards to just kind of moving forward for you personally.
Yeah, and I think for me it's the sense of grounding and the stability and. I think everybody deserves a place to belong, and so even with our family, we have people that are friends that have become family. They are part of our family now. Right. And so I think we've got to view, it's not just as blood relatives or adoption, like what does family mean to us? And so for us, that's an ever expanding picture. How do we create space for people within our home, getting a meal to them? So I think it's very grounding and centering, and I think that people need that, and if I'm not grounded, if I don't have stability that my family gives to me, I cannot be that for other people.
Right.
And so I think it's a place of safety. It's a place of learning and stretching and growing that I think it's just a part of life.
Beautiful.
And knowing that will translate into every part of our life and realizing we're never going to arrive. Right. But we within the confines of love, that we can do some pretty cool things.
What's been the greatest lesson that you've learned up to this point in terms of being a dad and having kids?
I think you always, and I think most parents would say this, you don't realize how selfish you really are, But I think for me, it's also with the love that I feel for my kids. There's a fierceness to that is hard to explain until you have your own children, and just the commitment to their success. It's just I never knew that I could care so deeply, and sometimes that looks like me pushing my kids too hard, because I want the best for them, but then be able to pull that back, and when I make a mistake, doing my best to go back to them and say, you know what, I messed up, I'm sorry. So I think it's taught me a lot of humility, and I think it's taught me a lot about myself, good and bad. And then going back to that inner work, and that's a huge trigger for you to know if you've got inner work to do, and I've got plenty to do.
Yeah, we all do, man, right? Yeah. So two more things here before we wrap this conversation up. The word legacy is something that's thrown around a lot, kind of in our culture and in the world. So I don't know how much you've thought about that. If you have, what do you, and if you really haven't thought about it, that's fine too. But just maybe just for our conversation's sake and just for the listeners, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want personally, Caleb, your legacy to be when your time's up?
Yeah, and one of the tools that I use is a list of affirmations. And actually the last one of my affirmations is that I will leave a legacy for my kids and for the world. And so what that looks like for me is I want to see justice in the world. I know that I can't change the entire world, but if I could change the world of a few people, I think that gives them the tools for that then to be multiplied. So for me, I want my legacy to be, one that has created space. I've set at a table for people, that they're welcomed, and that they are given the encouragement that they need to go out and do what they're called to do, what they're passionate about. And I want to see these. I want to see social justice issues like race, like immigration, like refugees, like all these different issues in the world. I want to see a change in the narrative and how we engage those conversations. So to me, if we see a change in that, I feel like that I've done, that's part of what I was put on earth to do.
Great. Last question, what sets your soul on fire?
Seeing other people come alive. Again, and that just going back to that creating space for people. And when I see the lights go on for somebody who has never encountered an Iraqi or a Syrian refugee or poverty, and I see them come alive with, oh my gosh, I can do something about this, that sets my soul on fire. Having meals with people sets my soul on fire. Just being around people of like mind that are wrestling the same things, that does. I had a dinner last night with somebody that was questioning things, and we just creating space for people to be who they are sets my soul on fire. Cool.
Well, Caleb, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday just to hang out with myself and the 127 Fit podcast listeners. I thank you for just your openness, your transparency, your willingness to just kind of dig into your story and put it out there for the world to hear. And the whole impetus behind my podcast is people, to share their story to positively impact the world. And I definitely know that because we had a little bit of a conversation previous to this podcast conversation, I left with the first conversation knowing that we had a lot in common in the sense of alignment and some very similar values and shared point of view. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. If somebody wants to kind of follow along your journey, connect with you, find out more about what you have going on in your life and the table initiative, things like that, where can people reach out to you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so and when it comes to the table, the best place to follow us is Instagram.
Okay.
And that's at the Table Initiative.
Okay.
And also, you guys are welcome to call me with questions. Like I like having these conversations. And if you have questions about real estate, just follow me on my personal page. Instagram is at Caleb David, and Facebook I'm at Caleb David as well. So pretty easy to find the guy with two first names. But you can reach out to me and ask me questions, 719-425-7139. I look forward to this being a catalyst for many other conversations.
For sure. Cool. All right. So listeners, I just want to thank you. once again for tuning in to the 127 Fit podcast. Thank you for hanging out with Caleb and myself. And I know that you guys are finding great value in these conversations. I know that people around the world are being positively impacted through my guest stories. And I just thank you so much for hanging out, for tuning in. If you guys want to follow along with just kind of what I've got going on in regards to the podcast and learning more about the guests I bring on, Instagram at 127 Fitness is really specifically for the podcast and my guests to promote them, to kind of get their stories out there. If you kind of want to follow along, just myself more personally, it's at QVars on Instagram. Facebook is at Quentin Vars. And if you guys would do me a huge favor, and please leave a 5-star rating and review, and also subscribe to the podcast, that would be awesome. If you think you would be a great guest, or if you have a friend or an acquaintance you think would be a great guest or guest for the 127 Fit podcast, please either you personally send me an email or give this email out to your friend or acquaintance. And the email is 127fit@gmail.com. And as you guys are finding value within the guests I'm bringing on to the podcast, if you would just share the episode or episodes that you're finding that value in on your Facebook and Instagram stories, again, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you would use the hashtag #BeSomeoneToFollow, we are creating a community. We are creating a group of people that are like-minded to positively impact the world. And per the usual, I will leave you with Proverbs 24:10, which states, "If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small." This time, until next time, I will catch you guys later.